In the heart of humanity's darkest hour, inside the gates of a place that would become a synonym for hell, one man held the power of life and death. His name was Josef Mengele, a doctor who tortured, a scientist who killed, infamously known as the Angel of Death. But in this kingdom of pain, another doctor walked the barracks, a woman stripped of her home, her family, and her freedom. To the prisoners, she was known by a different name. They called her an angel, a beacon in the abyss. This is the incredible true story of Dr. Gisella Perl, the woman who dared to defy the devil himself, armed with nothing but her courage and her bare hands. Before the barbed wire and the smokestacks, there was a world of light and promise. Gisella Perl was born in 1907 in the town of Sighet, Hungary, the same town that would later be the childhood home of Elie Wiesel. She was a brilliant and exceptionally determined young woman who from a young age had a singular dream: to become a doctor. This was a radical idea for a young Jewish woman at the time, but her spirit was unbreakable. At just 16 years old, she graduated at the top of her high school class, the only woman and the only Jew to achieve that honor. Her father, a respected head of the local Jewish community, was proud but also worried. He feared that a life in secular medicine might cause her to drift away from her faith. Standing before him, Gisella placed her hand on a sacred prayer book and made a solemn vow, a promise that would be tested in the fires of hell itself. She swore to him that she would always remain a good and true Jew. She kept that promise. Gisella went on to become a successful and beloved gynecologist. She married a wonderful surgeon, Dr. Ephraim Krauss, and together they built a beautiful life. They had a son, a home filled with love, and a shared passion for healing. Her life was a testament to the joy of bringing new life into the world, a world she believed was fundamentally good. But in March of 1944, that belief was shattered. The boots of Nazi soldiers marched into Hungary, and the vibrant, hopeful world she knew was extinguished forever. The descent into hell was swift and brutal. The life Gisella and her family had built was systematically dismantled. They were forced from their home into the cramped, squalid conditions of the Sighet ghetto. The familiar streets of her childhood became a prison. Soon after, they, along with thousands of others, were herded towards the train station. The air was thick with confusion, fear, and the cries of children. They were forced into cattle cars, packed so tightly they could barely breathe, with no room to sit, and a single bucket for a toilet. For 8 agonizing days, the train rumbled across the European landscape. In the suffocating darkness, with almost no food or water, their destination remained a terrifying mystery. That destination was a name that would be eternally burned into the memory of humankind: Auschwitz. The doors of the cattle car were thrown open to reveal a scene of organized chaos and terror. Blinding searchlights cut through the night. Dogs barked ferociously, and SS guards shouted incomprehensible orders. Families clinging to one another after the horrific journey were immediately ripped apart in the brutal process the Nazis called selection. It was on this ramp, under the foul-smelling, ash-filled sky, that Gisella first saw him, a handsome, impeccably dressed SS officer calmly directing the terrified crowds with a flick of his gloved finger. One direction meant a chance at life through forced labor, the other, immediate death in the gas chambers. This was Josef Mengele. In that single, horrific moment, Gisella's entire world was annihilated. Her son and parents were sent to the left, her husband to the right. She would never see them again. Gisella was shoved into a line of women, her mind numb with shock and grief. She was now just a number, tattooed onto her arm. She was utterly alone, stripped of her family, her profession, and her identity. She was certain she would soon be killed. But one day during a roll call, a guard asked if there were any doctors in the group. With nothing left to lose, Gisella stepped forward. This act saved her from the gas chambers, but it condemned her to a different kind of hell. When Josef Mengele learned that she was a trained gynecologist, he assigned her to work in the camp's infirmary, known as the Revier. But this was no place of healing. It was a laboratory of horror, the epicenter of Mengele's sadistic and inhuman experiments. The camp hospital was a nightmare. There were no beds, only filthy, lice-infested wooden bunks. There were no bandages, no running water, no soap, and certainly no medicine. The only instrument Gisella had was a small pocket knife she had managed to hide, which she kept sharpened by scraping it against a stone. She was forced to work under the direct command of Mengele, the so-called Angel of Death. He was a man obsessed with his grotesque vision of creating a master race. His research involved torturing prisoners in the most depraved ways imaginable. He injected diseases into children to watch them die, performed surgeries without anesthesia, and poured caustic chemicals into the eyes of young girls to try and change their color to blue. Gisella was forced to be a helpless witness, a doctor with no power to heal. In the twisted hierarchy of Auschwitz, Mengele saw Gisella's skills as a gynecologist, as a valuable tool for his own perverse studies. He was particularly interested in pregnant women. One day he gave Dr. Perl a truly cruel and deceptive assignment. He ordered her to find and report every single pregnant woman in the camp. To help her, he authorized her to make a promise. Tell the women that if they came forward, they would be transferred to a different camp, one where they would receive better food, cleaner housing, and even extra milk for their babies. To women who were starving, exhausted, and desperate to protect their unborn children, this promise sounded like a miracle. It was a lie, spun by a devil. Trusting that a doctor would not lie to them, many women secretly confessed their pregnancies to Gisella. They saw her as a lifeline, their only hope for saving themselves and their children from the daily horrors of Auschwitz. Gisella, new to the camp's unimaginable cruelty, and perhaps clinging to a desperate hope herself, dutifully compiled the list and gave it to Mengele. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had unknowingly delivered these women directly into the hands of the monster. One night, the horrifying truth behind Mengele's promise was revealed. Gisella watched in silent, sickening terror as the women from her list were rounded up by SS guards. She saw them being brutally beaten with clubs and whips, saw them being savaged by guard dogs, all while they were screaming for mercy. Then she witnessed the ultimate act of barbarism. The pregnant women were dragged away and thrown, still alive, into the roaring fires of the crematorium pits. The smell, the screams, the sight of it all burned itself into her memory. Mengele had not saved them. He had simply gathered them for a more efficient slaughter, likely after performing horrific experiments on them. In that moment, Gisella Perl understood, with chilling, soul-shattering certainty, pregnancy in Auschwitz was not a condition to be nurtured. It was an immediate and automatic death sentence for both the mother and the child. Dr. Perl was now faced with an impossible, soul-crushing choice, a moral dilemma that no human being should ever have to confront. As a doctor, she had sworn the Hippocratic oath to protect all life. As a devout Jew who had made a sacred promise to her father, she believed that every life was a gift from God. But in Auschwitz, her medical ethics and her deeply held faith collided with a monstrous and insane reality. She realized that to uphold the spirit of her oath, to save a life, she would first have to break its most fundamental rule. She would have to take a life. Standing in the filth and despair of the barracks, she made a silent, solemn vow to God and to herself. Never again, she decided, would a pregnant woman be discovered in Auschwitz. This vow became her grim, secret mission, a desperate act of defiance performed in the heart of the death machine. In the dead of night, hidden in the darkest corners of the disease-ridden barracks, Dr. Perl began to perform secret abortions. The conditions were something out of a medieval nightmare. With no instruments, no sanitation, and certainly no painkillers, she had to rely on the only tools she had left, her knowledge and her bare hands. She worked in silence and in shadow, while other women stood guard. Each procedure was a horrifying and deeply traumatic act, a violation of everything she had ever believed in. No one will ever know what it meant to me to destroy those babies, she later wrote in her memoir. In her heart, however, she knew it was a profound and necessary act of mercy. It was a horrifying calculation, but a clear one. If she did nothing, Mengele would eventually discover the pregnancy during his inspections. The mother would be tortured in his laboratory, and then both she and her baby would be brutally murdered. By ending the pregnancies in their earliest stages, she could save the mothers from that fate, erasing the evidence of their condition and giving them a chance, however small, to survive another day. She saved hundreds of women this way. Each secret, silent procedure was an act of rebellion, a life saved from Mengele, performed under the constant threat of immediate execution if she were ever discovered. But Dr. Perl's defiance went beyond this terrible secret work. She became a beacon of humanity in a place that was designed to extinguish it. With no medicine to offer the thousands of women suffering from typhus, dysentery, scarlet fever, and pneumonia, she treated them with the only tool she had left, her voice. At night, she would gather the sick and dying around her, and in a soft, calm voice, She would tell them beautiful stories of a life beyond the fences. She described lavish family dinners with detailed accounts of the food. She spoke of birthday parties, of music and laughter, and of the simple joy of freedom. For a few precious moments, her words were an anesthetic for the soul, allowing them to escape the horror. She was a doctor in the truest sense. She tended to the gruesome, infected wounds inflicted by the SS guards, using scraps of paper for bandages and a foul-smelling grease as a makeshift ointment. She comforted those in their final moments, holding their hands so they would not die alone. One survivor recalled how Dr. Perl created a special paste to treat a horrific, painful skin rash that plagued the barracks, sneaking around at night to apply it to the suffering women. Every small act of kindness was a risk. Every patient she comforted could have been her own death warrant. Yet she never stopped fighting for the dignity of those the world had forgotten. She was their doctor, their storyteller, their angel. She was not entirely alone in this fight. She worked alongside other courageous female doctors and nurses who were also prisoners. Women like Lucy Adelsberger, who also risked their lives to ease the pain of their fellow inmates. Together, they formed a thin, fragile line of humanity against an overwhelming ocean of institutionalized evil. They held the hands of the dying, whispered prayers for the dead, and shared their meager rations of stale, moldy bread with those who were weaker. They were a secret sisterhood of healers, bound by their shared oath and their shared suffering. Their presence was a constant, silent rebuke to the Nazi ideology that sought to dehumanize and destroy them. Their very existence was an act of resistance. Dr. Perl's responsibilities were immense. She was in charge of the health of all the women in her block, a population that was constantly changing as new transports arrived and the sick were sent to the gas chambers. She fought to keep the barracks as clean as possible to prevent the spread of disease, an almost impossible task. She later described how she would try to save the youngest girls, the ones who had just arrived, terrified and alone. She would pull them aside and whisper urgently, telling them to lie about their age, to say they were 16 or older, to insist they were strong enough to work. She knew that those deemed too young to be useful laborers were sent directly to their deaths. Every soul she could guide away from the gas, even for a day, was a small victory. As 1944 turned into 1945, the war began to close in on Auschwitz. The prisoners could hear the distant rumble of Allied bombs, a sound that brought both terror and a flicker of hope. For the Nazis, it was a signal to begin the final frantic phase of their genocide, the cover-up. They began to dismantle the machinery of death, blowing up the crematoria and burning documents, desperate to hide the scale of their crimes from the approaching world. For the prisoners, this did not mean freedom. It meant a new and final chapter of hell. The evacuations began. In the brutal cold of the Polish winter, tens of thousands of prisoners, including Gisella, were forced on death marches. They were given no winter clothing, only their thin, striped uniforms. They marched for days through the snow, their feet wrapped in rags. Those who stumbled from exhaustion or sickness were shot on the spot by the SS guards, their bodies left frozen on the side of the road. It was a march of skeletons, a testament to the Nazis' determination to kill until the very last moment. After the march, Gisella was shunted from one concentration camp to another, each one a different circle of hell. She finally ended up in the notorious Bergen-Belsen camp in Germany. It was here, in April of 1945, amidst a full-blown typhus epidemic and piles of unburied bodies, that the war finally came to an end for her. When British soldiers entered Bergen-Belsen, they were utterly unprepared for the horror they found. The camp was not a prison, but a charnel house. Thousands of bodies lay rotting in heaps, and 60,000 emaciated ghost-like survivors were on the brink of death from starvation and disease. The soldiers, hardened by combat, wept at the sight, but against all odds, amidst the skeletal figures and the vacant stares of the dying, Dr. Gisella Perl was still alive. She immediately went to work alongside the British forces, tending to the sick, her duty as a doctor overriding her own exhaustion and trauma. She had survived the Holocaust. She was free, but her greatest battle was yet to come. Liberation did not bring peace. It brought a crushing wave of grief, a stark and brutal reckoning With the enormity of her loss, the joy of survival was quickly replaced by the crushing weight of knowing she was utterly alone. For months, Dr. Perl moved through the chaotic landscape of displaced persons camps, desperately searching for any information about her family. She pinned their names to bulletin boards covered with hundreds of other handwritten notes, each one a desperate plea for news. She showed faded photographs to every survivor she encountered, her voice trembling as she asked, "Have you seen my husband, my son, my parents?" But the silence was her answer. The crushing truth settled in. She was the sole survivor. The memories of Auschwitz haunted her every waking moment and invaded her dreams. She relived the horrors of the selections, the faces of the women she couldn't save, the screams of the children being thrown into the flames. The faces of her family became blurred, replaced by the ghosts of the camp. She was tormented by the impossible choices she had been forced to make, wondering if she could have done more. The secret abortions she had performed to save women from Mengele's torture now seemed like monstrous acts, violations of her oath as a doctor and her faith as a Jew. The guilt consumed her, a poison that seeped into every corner of her soul. In 1947, alone in a small anonymous hotel room, she succumbed to the darkness, overwhelmed by grief, haunted by the ghosts of her past, and consumed by the belief that she was unworthy of life. She attempted to take her own life. She wanted to join her family in the silence of the grave, to escape the pain that had become her constant companion. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for her. She was discovered just in time and rushed to a hospital. She survived, but her wounds were far deeper than physical ones. She needed to heal her broken mind and her shattered soul. After her recovery, she found refuge in a French convent, a sanctuary of peace and prayer. It was here she began to slowly piece her life back together. Soon an opportunity arose. A distant relative in the United States offered to sponsor her immigration. America, he promised, was a land of new beginnings. With a fragile hope, she boarded a ship for New York, but instead of the welcome she dreamed of, she was met with suspicion. Instead of being hailed as a survivor, she was detained by U.S. immigration authorities. The charge was unthinkable. She was accused of being a Nazi collaborator, of willingly assisting Josef Mengele in his horrific work. The very acts of mercy she had performed were now being used as evidence against her. Her knowledge of Mengele's experiments was seen not as a burden she was forced to carry, but as a sign of her complicity. For months, she was subjected to grueling interrogations. Her past was dissected, her motives questioned, her character scrutinized. She was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, fighting to clear her name while battling the demons of her past. It was a cruel and Kafkaesque twist of fate. She had survived the angel of death, only to be branded a criminal in the land of the free. Just when she was about to lose all hope, her patients came to her rescue. The very prisoners whose lives she had saved in the darkest corners of Auschwitz heard of her plight and began to speak out. They knew the truth about Gisella Perl. They knew she was not a collaborator, but a hero. They organized a campaign to defend her, writing letters, contacting lawyers, and spreading the word about her true story. One by one, these women came forward to testify on her behalf. They recounted their experiences, describing in vivid detail the courage and compassion Gisella had shown them. They spoke of the secret abortions she had performed, explaining that these were not acts of evil, but acts of mercy, desperate attempts to save women from Mengele's sadism. One survivor stated, "Without Dr. Perl's medical knowledge and willingness to risk her life by helping us, it would be impossible to know what would have happened to me and to many other female prisoners." Their voices, rising from the ashes of the Holocaust, were a powerful testament to her character. They convinced the authorities that Gisella Perl was not a monster, but a savior. Finally, after a long and agonizing investigation, Gisella was cleared of all charges. In 1951, she was proudly granted U.S. citizenship. She was free, not only from the memories of Auschwitz, but from the shadow of suspicion that had haunted her for so long. Now she could finally begin to build a new life. Encouraged by prominent supporters like former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who had taken a personal interest in her case, Gisella decided to return to the profession she loved. She enrolled in a refresher course, passed her medical board exams, and joined the staff at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. She chose to specialize in gynecology, the same field she had practiced before the war, but her experiences in Auschwitz had transformed her. She no longer saw medicine simply as a science, but as a sacred calling, a way to repair the broken world. She became particularly interested in treating infertility, helping couples who had struggled for years to conceive. She poured all her energy and compassion into her work. Becoming a pioneer in the field of reproductive medicine, she developed new techniques and treatments, finding a way to transform her trauma into a source of healing for others. Her work became a sacred ritual. Over her long and distinguished career in New York, Dr. Perl delivered an estimated 3,000 healthy crying babies into the world. But with each new life, the memory of the lives she was forced to end was always present. A nurse who worked with her recalled that before every single delivery, Dr. Perl would step aside for a quiet moment. She would close her eyes and say the same silent prayer, a prayer that was a plea and a demand to the heavens. "God," she would say, "you owe me a life. A living baby." Each healthy birth was a personal victory, a small piece of justice, a life created in defiance of the death she had witnessed. In 1948, she published her powerful memoir, I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz. It was one of the very first accounts to be published by a survivor, and it shocked the world with its unflinching descriptions of the medical horrors perpetrated by the Nazis. The book was her testimony, not just for herself, but for the millions who could no longer speak. It was her way of ensuring that the world would never forget the atrocities committed in the name of science. She dedicated the rest of her life to education, speaking at universities and community centers, sharing her story so that future generations would understand the consequences of hatred and indifference. For decades, Gisella believed she was completely alone in the world, the last remnant of her murdered family. But the universe had one final, incredible miracle in store for her. Just before being taken to Auschwitz, she and her husband had made a heart-wrenching decision to hide their young daughter, Gabriella, with a non-Jewish family, hoping to save her from the Nazi dragnet. For over 30 years, Gisella believed Gabriella had perished along with everyone else, but her daughter had survived the war. After years of searching by relatives, the two were finally, miraculously, reunited in 1979. The mother who thought she had lost everything was given back the one thing she cherished most. In the chaos of Auschwitz, as they were being separated, Gisella's husband had yelled out a final hopeful promise to her, "We will meet someday in Jerusalem." He did not survive, but Gisella never forgot his words. After being reunited with her daughter, she finally fulfilled that promise. She left her successful practice in New York and moved to Israel to live with Gabriella and her grandchildren. She had come home. Dr. Gisella Perl passed away peacefully in 1988, having lived a life of unimaginable horror, but also one of profound courage, resilience, and boundless love. Her journey had come full circle, ending in the city of peace her husband had dreamed of. What does it mean to be a hero? Is it someone who is fearless? Or is it someone who feels unimaginable fear and acts anyway? Dr. Gisella Perl faced choices that no human should ever have to face. She was forced to break her most sacred oaths in order to uphold them. In a place designed to strip away all humanity, she held on to hers with every fiber of her being. While Josef Mengele, the angel of death, escaped justice and lived out his life in freedom, Gisella Perl, the angel of Auschwitz, spent the rest of her days healing, creating, and honoring the lives that were lost. Her life is a powerful, painful, and ultimately inspiring reminder that even in the deepest shadow, a single light can burn with the fierce, defiant flame of hope. Her legacy is not just in the hundreds of women she saved, but in the thousands of lives she brought into the world, each one a victory over the darkness she endured. Her story is a testament to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit and a solemn promise that we must never, ever forget. The end of the war did not mean the end of injustice. While Gisella Perl fought for her sanity, her reputation, and her right to a future, the man who caused her so much pain, Josef Mengele, slipped through the cracks of post-war chaos. Using a network of former Nazi sympathizers, he escaped from Germany and made his way to Argentina. He lived for decades under various aliases, a free man who never once had to answer for his crimes. He practiced medicine, raised a family, and enjoyed the sunshine of South America, all while his victims wrestled with the lifelong scars he had inflicted upon them. This bitter reality is a crucial part of Gisella's story. The contrast between her struggle and his escape highlights a painful truth about the world, that survival is not always fair, and justice is not always served. While Gisella dedicated her life to creating and healing, Mengele's legacy remained one of pure, unrepentant destruction. He would eventually drown while swimming off the coast of Brazil in 1979, taking the secrets of his countless atrocities with him to the grave. He was a monster who was never brought to justice, a ghost who haunted the memories of every survivor he had ever touched. Faced with the fact that Mengele might never be captured, Gisella knew she had a different kind of weapon to wield against him: the truth. Her 1948 memoir, I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz, was more than just a book. It was an indictment. It was one of the very first published accounts to expose the specific, depraved nature of the medical experiments conducted in the camps. At a time when the world was still struggling to comprehend the scale of the Holocaust, her testimony provided a chilling first-hand account of the perversion of science and medicine under the Nazi regime. She gave a voice to the voiceless, ensuring their suffering would not be erased from history. Publishing the book was an act of immense courage. It forced her to relive her most traumatic memories in excruciating detail, but she felt a sacred duty to bear witness. She dedicated the rest of her life to education, believing it was the only antidote to the hatred that had destroyed her world. She spoke at universities, synagogues, and community centers, sharing her story with a new generation that had not experienced the war. She wanted them to understand that the Holocaust was not an abstract historical event. It was something that happened to real people, to families, to mothers and their children. She made them see the human faces behind the staggering numbers. While her public life was dedicated to remembrance, her private life was dedicated to renewal. Her work at Mount Sinai Hospital was not just a job, it was a form of therapy, a way to reclaim her identity as a healer. Every baby she delivered felt like a direct rebuke to Mengele's ideology of death. In Auschwitz, her hands had been forced to end pregnancies to save lives. Now in New York, those same hands were bringing new life into the world. Each cry of a newborn was a sound of victory, a symbol of hope and continuity in the face of annihilation. She was, in a very real sense, rebuilding the world that had been torn apart. Her patients adored her. Many of them were themselves survivors, or the children of survivors, who sought her out because they knew she understood their history and their pain. She built a thriving practice, a safe space where women felt heard and cared for. She never spoke of her own trauma unless asked, but her deep empathy was a tangible presence in the room. She knew what it was like to lose a child, which gave her a unique and powerful connection to the women she was helping to become mothers. Her office was not just a medical clinic, it was a sanctuary of hope, a place where the future was being born, one baby at a time. But even surrounded by new life, the shadows of the past were never far away. The joy of her success was always tinged with the sorrow of her loss. The estimated 3,000 babies she delivered could never replace the one child she had lost. The promise she had made to her husband to meet again in Jerusalem remained an open wound, a dream that could never be fulfilled. She carried her grief with a quiet dignity, but it was a constant companion. Outwardly, she was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. But inwardly, she still wrestled with the ghosts of Auschwitz. One survivor who knew her well in New York recalled that Gisella rarely smiled with her eyes. There was always a sadness there, a window into a past that she could never fully escape. She had rebuilt her life, but the foundations were forever cracked. This is the complex truth of survival. It is not a simple story of triumph over evil. It is a lifelong process of learning to live with the scars, of finding ways to create meaning in the aftermath of unimaginable loss. Gisella Perl's life was a testament to this struggle, a masterclass in how to build a future without ever forgetting the past. For more than 30 years, Gisella believed she was the sole survivor of her direct family. She had made peace with this terrible fact, but the universe, it seemed, had one final, incredible miracle in store for her. Just before her family was deported to Auschwitz, in a frantic, last-ditch effort to save at least one of their children, she and her husband had made the heart-wrenching decision to hide their young daughter, Gabriella, with a non-Jewish family. They gave her away, hoping that this act of separation would be her salvation. For decades, Gisella was certain that Gabriella had been discovered and had perished along with everyone else. But Gabriella had survived. The brave family that took her in had kept her safe throughout the war, raising her as their own. After the war, with Europe in chaos, she was eventually taken in by another family who raised her, unaware of her mother's survival. It wasn't until the late 1970s, after years of painstaking searching by distant relatives and survivor networks, that the connection was finally made. A message was delivered to an aging Dr. Perl in New York. Your daughter is alive. In 1979, the mother who thought she had lost everything and the daughter who grew up believing she was an orphan were miraculously, tearfully reunited. The reunion was a moment of profound, almost unbearable emotion. It was the closing of a circle, a healing of a wound that had been open for more than 3 decades. It was a gift of grace in a life that had known so much pain. This miracle gave Gisella a new sense of purpose in her final years. After the reunion, she made a momentous decision. She remembered the last words her husband had yelled to her in the chaos of the Auschwitz selection ramp. "We will meet someday in Jerusalem." He had not survived to fulfill that promise, but she now realized that she could fulfill it for him. She closed her successful medical practice in New York, packed her belongings, and left the life she had painstakingly rebuilt in America. She moved to Israel to live with her daughter Gabriella and her grandchildren. She had finally come home. She spent her final years surrounded by the love of the family she thought she had lost forever. She had found her peace, not in forgetting the past, but in connecting it to a future her husband had only dreamed of. Dr. Gisella Perl passed away peacefully in 1988 in Herzliya, Israel, her journey complete. What then is the ultimate legacy of Dr. Gisella Perl? It is not a simple story. It is a complex tapestry of horror and hope, of impossible choices and unwavering courage. She was a woman who was forced to break her most sacred oaths in order to uphold them. In a place meticulously designed to strip away every shred of human decency, she held onto hers with every fiber of her being, using her knowledge not to destroy, but to save, even when it meant performing acts that tore at her soul. Her life is a powerful, painful, and ultimately inspiring reminder that even in the deepest shadow, a single light can burn with the fierce, defiant flame of hope. Her legacy is not just in the hundreds of women she saved from the clutches of Mengele, but in the thousands of lives she brought into the world in the years that followed. Each of those 3,000 babies was a victory over the darkness she endured, a testament to her belief in the future. Her story forces us to ask ourselves difficult questions. What would we have done in her place? What is the true meaning of morality when the world has gone insane? And what is the source of the incredible strength that allows a person to witness the worst of humanity and still dedicate their life to healing? Today, Auschwitz is a museum and a memorial. The barracks where Gisella Perl risked her life are now silent. The infirmary where she worked is empty, but the echoes of what happened here remain. Her story is a vital part of the history of this place. It reminds us that among the millions of victims, there were also heroes, not soldiers with guns, but ordinary people who, when faced with extraordinary evil, made the choice to act with extraordinary courage. People who, in the face of total dehumanization, fought to preserve the humanity of others. To remember Gisella Perl is to remember the importance of moral courage. It is to recognize that even in the most powerless of situations, there are still choices to be made. Her life demonstrates that one person, armed with nothing but their conscience and their skills, can make a profound difference. She could not stop the machinery of death, but she could throw a wrench in its gears. She could not save everyone, but she saved everyone she could. And in doing so, she saved a small piece of the world's soul. In the end, Gisella Perl kept the promise she made to her father so many years before. She remained a good and true person of faith, but her understanding of that faith had been forged in the fires of Auschwitz. She learned that goodness is not about following rules, it is about saving lives. She learned that faith is not about blind obedience, it is about wrestling with impossible questions and finding the courage to act. And she learned that the greatest act of defiance against a culture of death is to choose, again and again, to affirm life. Her life stands as a testament to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. It is a story that should be told and retold, not just to remember the horrors of the past, but to inspire us to be better in the present. It reminds us that in our own lives, in our own times, we will all face moments where we must choose between what is easy and what is right. And in those moments, we can look to the example of the angel of Auschwitz and find the strength to choose with courage, with compassion, and with an unwavering belief in the preciousness of every single human life.